Why would a woman who once lived in a mansion suddenly be told she no longer belonged there? When I asked my sister that question, her own son cut me off and said the house belonged to his wife now, and warned that if my sister ever went near it again, she would regret it immediately. That was the moment I understood he had no idea who he was threatening or who I really was. Before we go any further, take a second to subscribe, hit the hype button, and like the video. It really helps the channel grow. And tell us in the comments, what would you do in this situation? The kitchen in my apartment was small but functional. Morning light came through the window above the sink, and I was making coffee when my phone rang. Fina's name appeared on the screen. I answered, expecting the usual check-in, maybe a complaint about traffic or the weather. Instead, her voice sounded thin, like she had been crying for hours. "Dakota, I need to talk to you." I set the coffee pot down. "What happened? Can you come over? Where are you?" She gave me an address I didn't recognize. It was across town, in a neighborhood that didn't match the one she had lived in for the past decade. I told her I would be there in 30 minutes. The drive gave me time to think. Fina had always been careful with her words. She didn't call unless something was wrong, and she definitely didn't ask me to come over unless it was serious. When I arrived, the building looked dated. The paint was peeling near the entrance, and the parking lot had cracks running through the asphalt. I walked up to the second floor and knocked on the door marked 214. Fina opened it after a moment. She looked exhausted. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her eyes were red. She stepped aside to let me in. The apartment was small, one bedroom, a cramped living room, and a kitchenette that barely had counter space. There were boxes stacked against the wall, some of them still taped shut. It didn't look like a place someone would choose to live. It looked like a place someone ended up. "What is this?" I asked. She closed the door and leaned against it. "This is where I'm staying now." I looked around again. "Why?" She didn't answer right away. She walked to the couch and sat down, folding her hands in her lap. I stayed standing. "Fina, what happened to the house?" Her jaw tightened. "Brooks said it's better this way." "Better for who?" She shook her head. "I don't want to talk about it." "Then why did you call me?" She looked up at me, and I saw something in her expression that I hadn't seen in years. Fear. Not the kind that comes from physical danger, but the kind that comes from realizing you've been cornered and you didn't see it happening. "I just needed to see you," she said quietly. I sat down across from her. "Fina, you lived in that house for 10 years. You owned it. What happened?" She opened her mouth to answer, but before she could, the door opened behind me. Brooks walked in without knocking. He was wearing a designer jacket and sunglasses, even though it was barely 9 in the morning. He glanced at me, then at Fina, and his expression shifted into something between annoyance and amusement. "Mom, I told you not to bother Dakota with this." I stood up slowly. "She didn't bother me. I asked." He pulled off his sunglasses and looked at me directly. "Well, now you know. She's fine. She's staying here for a while until we figure things out." "Figure what out?" "Family stuff." He said it like that was supposed to be the end of the conversation. I kept my voice calm. "I'm family, so why don't you explain it to me?" Brooks smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "The house belongs to Elara now. We restructured things. It's legal, it's done, and it's none of your business." "Restructured how?" "Mom signed the papers. It's over." Fina didn't say anything. She just sat there, staring at the floor. I looked at Brooks. "And she's living here now because she doesn't need that much space. This is better for her." "Better for her, or better for you?" His smile faded. "Watch your tone, Dakota." I didn't move. "I'm just trying to understand why my sister, who owned a mansion, is now living in a rental that looks like it should be condemned." Brooks stepped closer. "You want to understand? Fine. The house is in Elara's name, Mom agreed to it. And if she tries to go back there, if she tries to cause problems, she's going to regret it. Immediately. The room went silent. Fina looked up at him, her face pale. Brooks held my gaze, waiting for me to push back. I didn't. Instead, I nodded slowly, like I was accepting what he said. Got it. He seemed satisfied. Good. Then we're done here. He turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind him. I heard his footsteps fade down the hallway, and then the sound of a car engine starting in the parking lot. Fina let out a shaky breath. Dakota, please don't. I won't, I said. Not yet. She looked at me, confused. I stood up and walked to the door, closing it quietly. Then I turned back to her. Do you still have copies of the original paperwork, the purchase documents? She hesitated. I think so. Why? Because I want to see them. Dakota, he said. I know what he said. I kept my voice even. But I want to see the documents anyway. She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. They're in one of the boxes. Find them, I said. I'll come back tomorrow. I left before she could say anything else. As I walked to my car, I replayed the conversation in my head. Brooks had been confident. Too confident. He thought the threat was enough to shut me down. He thought I would back off because he raised his voice and waved some paperwork around. He had no idea who he was threatening, and he definitely had no idea who I really was. The next morning, I went back to Fina's apartment. She answered the door quickly like she had been waiting. She led me inside without saying much. The boxes were still there, but one of them was open now. A stack of folders sat on the coffee table. These are the ones I could find, she said. I picked up the top folder and opened it. Inside were copies of the original purchase agreement, tax records, and title documents. The property had been purchased 12 years ago. Fina's name was on everything. Tell me what happened, I said. From the beginning. She sat down and folded her arms. Brooks said we needed to restructure the estate. He said it would protect me if something happened. Taxes, probate, all that. He brought Elara into it because they were married, and he said it would make things easier. Easier how? He said if the house was in her name, it would avoid complications later. He said I could still live there. He said it was just a formality. I flipped through the documents. And you signed? He's my son, Dakota. I trusted him. When did this happen? About 6 months ago. And when did you move out? 3 weeks ago. Her voice cracked. He said the house needed repairs. He said I should stay somewhere else while they handled it. Then he said I couldn't come back. I closed the folder and set it down. Did he give you any kind of written agreement? Anything that said you could still live there? She shook her head. It was verbal. He promised. Verbal doesn't mean anything in court. She looked at me, her eyes starting to well up. What am I supposed to do? I didn't answer right away. I picked up another folder and started reading. The more I went through, the more I realized how carefully this had been set up. Brooks had used legal language that sounded protective but was actually transferring control. Fina had signed because she didn't understand what she was signing, and now she was stuck. Do you remember the lawyer who handled this? I asked. Brooks brought him. I never met him before. Do you have his name? She dug through the papers and pulled out a business card. I took it and slipped it into my pocket. What are you going to do? She asked. I'm going to figure out what's real and what's not. Brooks said, I don't care what Brooks said. I stood up. He doesn't get to threaten you and expect no one to check. She looked relieved, but also terrified. Dakota, if he finds out, he won't. Not yet. I left the apartment and drove across town to a coffee shop near the courthouse. It was quiet, the kind of place where people worked on laptops and didn't pay attention to each other. I ordered a black coffee and sat in the corner. I pulled out my phone and opened the family group chat. It had been active recently. Brooks had sent a photo of the mansion's front entrance. The caption said, "Home sweet home." Elara had replied with a heart emoji. Fina hadn't said anything. I scrolled back through the messages. A month ago, Brooks had posted about renovations. 2 months ago, he had talked about updating the security system. 3 months ago, he had mentioned moving some furniture around. The whole time, he was acting like the house was his, and no one had questioned it. I closed the app and stared out the window. Brooks was confident because he thought he had covered everything. He thought Fina wouldn't fight back. He thought I wouldn't care. He was wrong on both counts. I finished my coffee and drove to my office. The technology company I worked for had a procurement division that handled contracts, vendor agreements, and compliance checks. My job was to make sure every transaction was clean. I knew how to read fine print. I knew how to spot gaps, and I knew how to follow money. I sat at my desk and pulled up the business card Fina had given me. The lawyer's name was Gerald Finch. I ran a quick search. His firm specialized in estate planning and asset transfers. Nothing unusual, but when I looked closer, I saw something interesting. Most of his clients were family trusts, and most of those trusts had clauses that allowed for conditional ownership. Conditional ownership meant the title could be transferred, but the original owner could retain certain rights. It depended on how the documents were written, and if Brooks had rushed the process, there might be gaps. I leaned back in my chair and thought, if Fina still had any legal claim to the property, it would be buried in the paperwork. And if Brooks had lied about the terms, that was fraud. I picked up my phone and called Mason Hale. He was a real estate attorney I had worked with on corporate deals. He answered on the second ring. "Dakota, what do you need?" "Legal question. Hypothetical." "Go ahead." If someone transfers property ownership through a family trust, but the original owner wasn't fully informed, can that be challenged? Mason paused. Depends on the trust language. If there was coercion or misrepresentation, yes, but you'd need proof. What kind of proof? Documents showing the original intent, witness statements, anything that shows the transfer wasn't voluntary or informed. How long does someone have to challenge it? Varies by state, usually a few years. Why? Just curious. Dakota, if you're involved in something, you need to tell me now. I'm not involved, I said. Yet. I hung up and stared at the ceiling. Brooks had made a mistake. He had assumed Fina wouldn't fight. He had assumed I wouldn't get involved, and he had assumed the paperwork was airtight. But assumptions could be wrong. I opened my laptop and started making notes. I needed to see the full trust agreement. I needed to know who had signed off on the transfer, and I needed to figure out if Fina had any leverage left. My phone buzzed. A new message in the family chat. Brooks had posted again. Big plans for the property. Stay tuned. I didn't reply. I just saved the screenshot and added it to the folder I was building. 3 days later, I drove to the mansion. It was early evening and the light was fading. I parked across the street and watched the gate. The property looked the same as it always had. Tall hedges, a wide driveway, security cameras mounted near the entrance. But now it felt different. Now it felt like enemy territory. I wasn't planning to go inside. I just wanted to see it. I wanted to remind myself why I was doing this. After a few minutes, a car pulled up to the gate. Brooks. I recognized the black sedan. The gate opened and he drove through without stopping. I waited. 10 minutes later, the gate opened again. Fina's car approached, but before it could enter, Brooks came back out on foot. He stood in the driveway, blocking the path. I rolled down my window slightly and listened. Mom, I told you not to come here, Brooks said. Fina's voice was quiet. I just wanted to get some of my things. Your things are being packed. I'll bring them to you. Brooks, this is my house. No, he said firmly. It's not. We went over this. The house is in Elara's name now. You don't live here anymore. I just want to go inside for 5 minutes. Brooks stepped closer to her car. If you try to come back here again, you're going to regret it. Immediately. Fina didn't respond. She just sat there, gripping the steering wheel. After a long moment, she put the car in reverse and drove away. Brooks watched her leave, then turned and walked back inside. The gate closed behind him. I sat in my car, my hands tight on the wheel. That was the second time he had threatened her. And this time, I had heard it directly. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice memo app. I played back the recording I had started before Fina arrived. The audio was clear. Every word Brooks had said was saved. I drove to my apartment and went straight to my office. I had a filing cabinet in the corner where I kept personal documents. I pulled out a folder labeled with the property address. It was from 12 years ago when Fina had first bought the house. I had helped her coordinate the purchase. I had reviewed the contracts. I had made sure everything was in order. I opened the folder and spread the documents across my desk. The original title was in Fina's name. The mortgage had been paid off 8 years ago. The property was hers, free and clear, or at least it had been. I pulled up the new documents Fina had given me and compared them side by side. The transfer had been handled through a family trust. The trust listed Elara as the primary beneficiary, but buried in the fine print was a clause I hadn't noticed before. The transfer was conditional. It required Fina's explicit consent. Not just a signature, explicit, informed consent. And there was a stipulation that the original owner could revoke the transfer within 12 months if the terms were violated. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the page. Brooks had screwed up. He had pushed Fina out before the 12-month window closed, and that meant the transfer could still be challenged. I picked up my phone and called Mason Hale again. Dakota, twice in 1 week. What's going on? I need you to look at something. Is this still hypothetical? No. There was a pause. All right. Send me what you have. I scanned the documents and emailed them over. While I waited, I opened my laptop and pulled up the bank records. I had access to Fina's accounts. She had given me permission years ago when she needed help managing her finances. The account linked to the property showed regular withdrawals over the past 6 months. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. Someone had been draining it. My phone rang. Mason. Dakota, this is a mess. Tell me. The trust is legitimate, but the consent clause is a problem. If your sister didn't fully understand what she was signing, this could be reversed. But you'd need to prove coercion or fraud. I have recordings of her son threatening her. Does that count? Mason hesitated. It helps, but you need more. You need to show that the transfer wasn't in her best interest and that she was misled. What if I can prove he's been taking money from her accounts? That's fraud. If you have proof, bring it to me. I will. I hung up and went back to the bank records. The withdrawals were all authorized by Brooks. He had power of attorney. But the way he was using it, pulling money out without explanation, without Fina's knowledge, that crossed a line. I saved the records and added them to the folder. Then I opened the family group chat again. Brooks had posted a new message. Family dinner this weekend. Everyone's invited. Let's celebrate. Celebrate what? I didn't reply, but I knew what he was doing. He was showing off. He was making sure everyone knew he was in control. I closed the app and stared at the ceiling. Brooks thought he had won. He thought the house was his. He thought Fina was too weak to fight back. And he thought I was too passive to care. He was wrong. I stood up and walked to the window. The city stretched out in front of me, lights flickering in the distance. Somewhere out there, Brooks was sitting in a house that didn't belong to him, acting like he had earned it. I wasn't going to let that stand. I went back to my desk and pulled out a notepad. I wrote down everything I had so far: the recordings, the financial records, the trust documents, the conditional ownership clause. It was enough to start, but I needed more. I needed to lock this down so tight that Brooks couldn't wiggle out of it. I picked up my phone and sent a message to Owen Keller, a compliance officer at my company. We had worked together on audits before. He knew how to trace money. Need a favor. Can you run a background check on a trust account? Confidential. He replied within minutes. Send me the details. I forwarded the information and set my phone down. Then I opened my calendar and blocked off the next 2 weeks. I wasn't going to rush this. I was going to do it right. Brooks had made his move. Now it was my turn. The next morning, I called Mason Hale and set up a meeting. His office was downtown, in a building that smelled like old wood and leather. He met me in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the street. Let's see what you've got, he said. I laid out the documents on the table, the original title, the trust agreement, the financial records, the recordings. Mason put on his reading glasses and started going through everything methodically. After a while, he leaned back in his chair. This is salvageable. How? The trust has a revocation clause. Your sister has 12 months from the date of signing to challenge the transfer if the terms were violated. Based on these recordings, it's clear she was coerced. And these withdrawals, he tapped the financial records. This is textbook misuse of power of attorney. So what's the next step? We file a petition to revoke the transfer. We present the evidence, and we request an injunction to freeze the property until the case is resolved. How long will that take? A few weeks to get it in front of a judge, maybe longer if Brooks fights it. He will. Mason nodded. Then we make sure the evidence is airtight. I left his office and drove to the bank. I had an appointment with Nora Pike, the relationship manager handling Fina's accounts. She met me in a private room near the back. Mr. Veron, she said, shaking my hand. What can I do for you? I need transaction records for this account. I handed her the account number. Everything from the past 12 months. She looked at the number, then at me. This account is under your sister's name. Do you have authorization? I showed her the power of attorney document Fina had signed years ago. It gave me access to her financial information. Nora reviewed it, then nodded. I'll pull the records. Give me a few minutes. She left the room. I sat there, drumming my fingers on the table. After 10 minutes, she came back with a printed report. Here's everything, she said. Deposits, withdrawals, transfers. Is there a problem? I scanned the report. The withdrawals were worse than I thought. Brooks had pulled out nearly $40,000 over 6 months, small amounts at first, $500 here, $1,000 there, then larger sums, $10,000, $15,000. Was my sister aware of these withdrawals? I asked. Nora hesitated. I can't speak to that, but they were all authorized by the power of attorney holder. Brooks Veron. Yes. I folded the report and put it in my folder. Thank you. She looked uncomfortable. Mr. Veron, if there's a dispute... There will be, I said, but not with you. I left the bank and drove to a parking garage near the courthouse. I needed to think. I sat in my car, staring at the concrete wall in front of me. Brooks had taken everything. The house, the money, Fina's dignity. And he had done it all with a smile, acting like he was doing her a favor. My phone buzzed. A text from Fina. Brooks is hosting the family dinner at the mansion. He wants me to come. Should I? I stared at the message for a long time. Then I replied, Yes. Go. Act normal. Are you sure? I'm sure. I'll be there too. I set my phone down and closed my eyes. Brooks wanted to show off. He wanted everyone to see him in control. Fine. Let him think he had won. Because the higher he climbed, the harder he was going to fall. I spent the rest of the week preparing. I met with Mason twice more to go over strategy. I coordinated with Owen Keller to trace the financial records. I reviewed every document, every clause, every loophole. By the time the weekend came, I had everything I needed. Saturday evening, I drove to the mansion. The gate was open. Cars lined the driveway. I parked near the back and walked to the entrance. Brooks was standing in the foyer, greeting guests. He was wearing a tailored suit, his hair slicked back. Elara stood next to him in a designer dress. They looked like they belonged there, like the house had always been theirs. Brooks saw me and smiled. "Dakota, glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. He clapped me on the shoulder. "Come on in, dinner's almost ready." I walked past him and into the living room. Fina was sitting on the couch, looking small and out of place. I caught her eye and gave her a slight nod. She relaxed a little. The dinner was exactly what I expected. Brooks talked the whole time, bragging about renovations, future plans, investments. Elara smiled and played the gracious hostess. No one mentioned Fina's name. No one asked where she was living. After dessert, Brooks stood up and raised his glass. "I just want to thank everyone for being here. This house means a lot to us, and we're excited to share it with the people we love." Everyone clapped. I didn't. Brooks looked at me. "Dakota, you've been quiet tonight. Everything all right?" "Just listening," I said. "Good." He smiled. "Because I have some big plans for this place, and I want everyone to be part of it." I nodded slowly. "I'm sure you do." The night ended an hour later. Guests left one by one. Fina stayed until the end, then slipped out quietly. I waited until she was gone, then walked to the foyer where Brooks was standing. "Thanks for coming," he said. "Thanks for having me." He leaned against the door frame, relaxed. "You know, Dakota, I'm glad we're on the same page now. I was worried you might try to make this complicated." "Why would I do that?" "I don't know. Family loyalty, I guess." I smiled. Family loyalty works both ways. Brooks frowned slightly, but before he could respond, I walked out. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The mansion was lit up, glowing in the dark. It looked beautiful, expensive, powerful, but it didn't belong to Brooks, and soon everyone was going to know it. The following Monday, I walked into my office and closed the door. I had 2 weeks to finalize everything. Mason had scheduled a hearing, and I needed to make sure every piece of evidence was locked down. I called Owen Keller. He answered on the first ring. "Owen, did you find anything?" "More than you think." He sounded tired. "The trust account Brooks set up? It's a shell. The money he's been pulling isn't going into investments or renovations. It's going into personal accounts. His and Elara's." "Can you prove that?" "I have the transaction logs. They're clear as day." "Send them to me." "Already did. Check your email." I opened my laptop and pulled up the files. Owen was right. The money wasn't being used for the property. It was being funneled out, bit by bit, into accounts that had nothing to do with the house. Brooks wasn't just taking control. He was stealing. I forwarded the files to Mason with a note. "This seals it." Then I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. Brooks had crossed every line. He had lied to Fina. He had threatened her. He had drained her accounts. And he had done it all while smiling, acting like he was the hero of the story. But he wasn't. I spent the next few days coordinating with Mason. We reviewed the petition line by line. We organized the evidence into categories: coercion, fraud, misuse of power of attorney. We prepared witness statements. We double-checked every date, every signature, every clause. By Friday, we were ready. Mason called me that afternoon. "The hearing is set for next Thursday. The judge will review the petition and decide whether to issue an injunction. If he does, the property transfer will be frozen pending a full investigation. And if Brooks fights it, he can try, but with this evidence he won't get far." I hung up and sat in silence for a moment. This was it. In 1 week, everything Brooks had built would start to crumble, and he had no idea it was coming. I opened the family group chat. Brooks had posted a new message. "Closing on a second property next month. Big things ahead." I didn't reply. I just saved the screenshot and added it to the folder. That evening, I drove to Fina's apartment. She answered the door quickly, her face tense. "What's going on?" she asked. I walked inside and set my bag down. "We have a hearing next week." Her eyes widened. "A hearing?" To revoke the property transfer. Dakota, I don't know if I can. You don't have to do anything, I said. I'm handling it. But Brooks doesn't know, not yet. She sat down, her hands shaking. What if this makes things worse? Worse than what? Worse than living in a rental while he takes everything you worked for? She didn't answer. I sat down across from her. Fina, you trusted him, and he used that trust to take everything. I'm not going to let him get away with it. She looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. What if we lose? We won't. But what if we won't, I said again. I've made sure of it. She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. Okay. I stayed for another hour, going over what would happen at the hearing. I explained the process, the timeline, the likely outcome. By the time I left, she looked less terrified and more resolved. As I drove home, I felt the weight of what was about to happen. This wasn't just about the house. It was about dignity. It was about making sure Brooks understood that he couldn't just take what he wanted and expect no consequences. The next few days passed slowly. I went to work, attended meetings, reviewed contracts, but the whole time, my mind was on Thursday, on the hearing, on the moment when Brooks would realize he had lost. Wednesday night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through every scenario. What if the judge didn't see it my way? What if Brooks had a lawyer who found a loophole? What if something went wrong? But then I thought about Fina, about the way she had looked when I first saw her in that rental apartment. Small, defeated, afraid. No, nothing was going to go wrong. Thursday morning, I put on a suit and drove to the courthouse. Mason met me in the lobby. He looked calm, confident. You ready? He asked. I've been ready. We walked into the courtroom. It was smaller than I expected. Wooden benches, a judge's bench at the front, a clerk's desk to the side. Brooks wasn't there yet. Neither was Elara. We sat down and waited. 10 minutes later, the door opened. Brooks walked in with a lawyer I didn't recognize. He looked annoyed, like he had been dragged here against his will. He glanced at me, then at Mason, and his expression shifted. Confusion, then anger. He walked over. What is this? A hearing, I said. For what? You'll find out. The judge entered before Brooks could respond. Everyone stood, then sat back down. The clerk called the case. Mason stood and presented the petition. He laid out the evidence methodically. The coercion, the recordings, the financial records, the conditional ownership clause. Every word was precise, every detail backed up by documentation. Brooks's lawyer tried to object, but the judge waved him off. I'll hear the evidence first. By the time Mason finished, the room was silent. The judge reviewed the documents, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up. Mr. Veron, do you have anything to say? Brooks stood, his face red. This is ridiculous. My mother signed the papers willingly. I was trying to help her. By threatening her? The judge asked. Brooks hesitated. There are recordings, the judge said. I've reviewed them. Your statements were clear. Brooks opened his mouth, then closed it. The judge turned to Mason. I'm issuing a temporary injunction. The property transfer is frozen, pending a full investigation. If your evidence holds, the transfer will be revoked. Mason nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. The judge stood, and the hearing was over. Brooks stared at me, his face twisted with rage. You did this? No, I said. You did this. He took a step toward me, but his lawyer grabbed his arm. Don't. Brooks jerked away and stormed out of the courtroom. Elara followed, her heels clicking on the tile floor. Mason turned to me. That went better than expected. What happens now? We wait for the investigation. But based on what we presented, I'd say the transfer is going to be revoked within a month. I nodded. Good. We walked out of the courthouse together. The sun was bright, the air warm. I felt lighter than I had in weeks. My phone buzzed. A message from Fina. "Did it work?" I replied. "Yes." She called immediately. Her voice was shaking. "What happened?" "The judge froze the transfer. Brooks can't touch the property." She let out a sob. "Dakota, It's not over yet," I said. "But we're winning." She cried for a few minutes. I let her. When she finally calmed down, she whispered, "Thank you." "You don't have to thank me," I said. "This is what family does." I hung up and stood on the courthouse steps, looking out at the city. Brooks had tried to take everything, but he had underestimated one thing. He had underestimated me, and that was his biggest mistake. 2 weeks later, Mason called. "The investigation is complete. The judge has scheduled a final hearing for Friday. This is it." "What do we need to do?" "Just show up. The evidence speaks for itself." Friday came faster than I expected. I drove to the courthouse again, this time with Fina. She was nervous, gripping her purse tightly as we walked inside. "What if Brooks tries something?" she asked. "He can't," I said. "Not anymore." We met Mason in the lobby. He looked confident. The judge reviewed everything. Brooks's lawyer tried to file a counter-petition, but it was denied. There's nothing left for him to argue. We walked into the courtroom. Brooks and Elara were already there. Brooks looked different. His suit was wrinkled, his face pale. He didn't look at me. The judge entered, and the hearing began. Mason presented the final evidence. The investigation had confirmed everything: coercion, fraud, misuse of authority. The conditional ownership clause had been violated. The transfer was invalid. The judge reviewed the documents one last time, then looked up. "Based on the evidence presented, I am revoking the property transfer. Ownership of the property will revert to Fina Verone, effective immediately. Mr. Brooks Verone is ordered to vacate the premises within 30 days. Any assets or funds taken from Ms. Verone's accounts must be returned within 60 days. Failure to comply will result in criminal charges." The room was silent. Brooks stood slowly, his face twisted with disbelief. "This is final," the judge said. "Court is adjourned." The gavel came down. Brooks turned to me, his eyes full of rage. "You think you've won?" "I know I have." He took a step toward me, but his lawyer grabbed him again. "Brooks, don't!" Brooks shook him off and stormed out. Elara followed without looking back. Fina stood next to me, tears streaming down her face. "It's really over?" "It's over," I said. She hugged me tightly. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to." Mason walked over. "The property is yours again, Ms. Verone. You can move back in whenever you're ready." Fina nodded, still crying. "Thank you, both of you." We left the courthouse together. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. Fina kept looking at me, like she couldn't believe what had just happened. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. "I'm going to make sure Brooks returns every cent he took." "And if he doesn't?" "Then he goes to jail." She smiled for the first time in weeks. He really thought he could get away with it. He thought a lot of things. We drove to the mansion. The gate was still open. Fina got out of the car and stood in the driveway, staring at the house. It looked different now. It looked like home again. "I'm going to go inside," she said quietly. "Do you want me to come with you?" She shook her head. "I need to do this alone." I watched her walk to the front door. She opened it slowly, then stepped inside. The door closed behind her. I sat in my car for a few minutes, letting the moment sink in. Brooks had tried to take everything. He had lied, manipulated, and threatened, and for a while it had worked, but not anymore. My phone buzzed, a message from Owen Keller. "Heard about the ruling. Nicely done," I replied. "Thanks for the help. Anytime." I set my phone down and started the engine. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The mansion was still there, lit up in the fading light. It belonged to Fina again, and Brooks was out. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt satisfied. Because sometimes the quiet ones win. And sometimes the people who think they're untouchable learn they're not. Brooks had learned that the hard way, and I had made sure of it. The next month was a blur. Fina moved back into the mansion. Brooks vacated without causing more trouble. His lawyer had warned him that any further resistance would result in criminal charges. Elara left with him, and I never saw her again. Fina called me every few days to update me. She was settling back in, redecorating, making the house feel like hers again. She sounded lighter, happier. I went back to my normal routine, work, meetings, contracts. But something had changed. I felt different, more aware, more willing to step in when something was wrong. One afternoon, I got a call from Mason Hale. Dakota, I wanted to let you know, Brooks returned the funds, all of them. How much? $38,000. It's been deposited back into your sister's account. That was fast. His lawyer advised him that fighting it would only make things worse. He cut his losses. Good. Mason paused. You did something impressive here, Dakota. Most people wouldn't have followed through like that. Most people aren't dealing with someone like Brooks. Still, you should be proud. I'm just glad it's over. We hung up, and I sat at my desk, staring at the wall. It was over. Fina had her house back, her money back, her dignity back. Brooks had lost everything he tried to steal. But part of me wondered if he had learned anything, or if he was just angry that he got caught. I didn't care. As long as he stayed away from Fina, that was enough. That evening, I drove to the mansion. Fina had invited me over for dinner. When I arrived, she was in the kitchen, humming to herself. The house smelled like garlic and herbs. Dakota! She hugged me when I walked in. Sit down. Dinner's almost ready. I sat at the kitchen table and watched her cook. She looked different, relaxed, like a weight had been lifted. How are you feeling? I asked. Better, she said. A lot better. Good. She set a plate in front of me and sat down across from me. We ate in comfortable silence for a while. Finally, she looked up. Dakota, I want to ask you something. Go ahead. Why did you do all of this? You could have just let it go. You could have told me to deal with it myself. I set my fork down. Because you're my sister, and because Brooks was wrong. But you risked a lot. Time, money, energy. It was worth it. She smiled. I don't think I'll ever be able to repay you. You don't need to. We finished dinner and I stayed for a while longer, talking about everything and nothing. When I finally left, the mansion looked peaceful, warm, like it was supposed to. As I drove home, I thought about everything that had happened, the threats, the lies, the manipulation, and the moment when it all came crashing down for Brooks. He had underestimated me. He had thought I was just another family member who wouldn't push back. But he was wrong, and now he knew it. A few weeks later, I got a message from an unknown number. Dakota, this is Brooks. We need to talk. I stared at the message for a long time, then I deleted it. He tried again the next day. I know you think I'm the bad guy, but you don't know the whole story. I didn't reply. The third message came a week later. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to understand why I did what I did. I still didn't reply. Finally, he stopped. I didn't hear from him again. Fina told me later that he had moved to another state. Elara had left him. His plans for the second property had fallen through. He was working a regular job now, living in an apartment, keeping a low profile. Do you feel bad for him? Fina asked. No, I said. Do you? She thought for a moment. A little. He's still my son. I know. But not enough to forgive him. Good. Life went back to normal after that. I kept working. Fina kept living in the mansion. We saw each other more often, and every time I visited, I was reminded of why I had done what I did. Because family meant protecting the people who couldn't protect themselves. And because sometimes The people who think they're untouchable need to be reminded that they're not. Brooks had learned that lesson, and I had made sure of it. Months passed. Winter turned into spring. Fina started hosting family gatherings again, small ones, just a few people at a time. She was careful about who she invited. Brooks's name was never mentioned. I was sitting in her living room one afternoon when she brought it up. "Do you ever think about him?" she asked. "Brooks?" "Yeah." I shook my head. "Not really." "I do," she admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if things could have been different." "They couldn't have." "How do you know?" "Because people like Brooks don't change. They just get better at hiding." She nodded slowly. "You're probably right." We sat in silence for a while. Then she looked at me. "You saved me, Dakota. You know that, right?" "I just did what needed to be done." "No," she said. "You did more than that. You gave me my life back." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. That evening I drove home feeling lighter than I had in a long time. The whole situation with Brooks felt like a distant memory now. Something that had happened, but was no longer relevant. I had won. Fina had won. And Brooks had lost. That was all that mattered. A year later, I got a call from Mason Hale. "Dakota, I have some news." "What is it?" "Brooks filed for bankruptcy. His assets were seized. He's lost everything." I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel pity. I just felt nothing. "Good to know," I said. "I thought you'd want to hear. Thanks for letting me know." We hung up, and I sat at my desk, staring out the window. Brooks had tried to take everything from Fina, and in the end, he had lost everything himself. It wasn't justice. It was consequence. And that was enough. That evening, I went to the mansion. Fina was in the garden, planting flowers. She looked peaceful, happy. "Dakota," she said, smiling. "What brings you by?" "Just wanted to check in." "I'm good, really good." I looked at the house behind her. It stood tall, solid, unchanged. A symbol of everything Brooks had tried to take and failed. "I'm glad," I said. We sat in the garden for a while, talking about nothing important. The weather, her plans for the summer, small things. As the sun set, I stood to leave. Fina walked me to the gate. "Dakota," she said, "thank you for everything. You don't have to keep thanking me. I know, but I will anyway." I smiled. "All right." As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The mansion was lit up, glowing in the twilight. Fina was standing at the gate, waving. I had done what I set out to do. I had protected my sister. I had stopped Brooks. And I had made sure that the people who thought they could take whatever they wanted learned they couldn't. It was over.